A thought experiment. Imagine there was someone who looked pretty much exactly like you. And this person comes to places that you also visit. A bar, for example. Wouldn't that...
It would lead to confusion.
Such a doppelganger could perhaps do a lot in your name.
We could suddenly be held responsible for things that we didn't even do.
Okay, it's just a thought experiment. A very, very unlikely one. Or is it?
And I looked over, and she looked over too, and that was a real moment. You. And she also said, you.
Identify that we call the ultra lookalike, people that are almost like identical twins.
Give me a break. Are our doppelgangers, our lookalikes, really running around out there? And if so, do we have a problem? Sure, it happens that we confuse people. Batman? But if we take a closer look, we can see the differences. Our faces are unique. We recognize them very early on. This is Mom, and this is not. Our cell phone also identifies us precisely. On the other hand, there are reports of doppelgangers, of strikingly similar faces. And let's be honest, with 8 billion people in the world, that sounds only likely, doesn't it? The idea of finding a doppelganger is somehow also appealing, but it can also be a painful experience. Like Richard Anthony Jones from Kansas. He served 17 innocent years in prison because he looked like a criminal and witnesses had misidentified him. The doppelganger as an existential threat. Dostoevsky already wrote about this. The film adaptation with Jesse Eisenberg as a shy employee shows just how oppressive this threat can be. A more self-confident version of himself forces his way into his life.
What'll it be?
I'll just have a Coke.
A Coke. And you?
Scrambled eggs.
You don't serve breakfast in the evening?
Well, do you still have eggs here?
Yeah.
And do you have a frying pan?
Yeah.
Then give me the damn food.
If there was more than one of us walking around, our identity would be in danger.
The lookalike is taking my place. He or she is the usurper. The one who questions me, and not just me, but my entire role in society. That's why it's so irritating.
It seems to be important to us humans that each face can only exist once. Where does that come from?
If we imagine that our human ancestors lived in relatively small groups, then it was indeed important for them to distinguish these faces from one another, to then remember things about that person that they can then recall when they recognize a face, but also to make many very subtle distinctions, such as recognizing emotional states, levels of awareness, and then to put all these things together.
Recognizing each other, being familiar and knowing that this is you is of course essential for our social interaction. Because it also shows how much we are embedded in these social structures, how much we depend on the recognition of others who identify us as those with certain achievements, with a place in society.
There are also societies of identical individuals on Earth. These ants are clonal, meaning exactly the same. The workers of the clonal predator ant reproduce without sex and only produce female offspring. However, this has the disadvantage that no genetic diversity can develop. In many non-clonal species, greater diversity and division of labor also result in greater productivity. Specific functions of individual animals are a recipe for success in social insect societies. Many animal species can distinguish between individuals. In a herd, for example, there is a hierarchy and the animals need to know who is who. They recognize each other by their faces. The ability of sheep to identify faces is as well developed as in humans. They can also distinguish between different human faces. And, brace yourselves, the archerfish can do that too, despite its mini-brain. Giraffes identify each other, among other things, by their spots. And chimpanzees also recognize each other by their buttocks. In social animals, which often move around on all fours, it seems to be advantageous to recognize group members from the front and from behind. This talent is no longer so pronounced in us humans. We look at each other mostly in the face. We owe our great diversity of facial features to the strong selection pressure in the course of evolution. It was simply an advantage if everyone was easily recognizable as an independent personality. Our brain is programmed to identify faces, so to speak. On average, we are able to recognize around 5,000 faces, including people we have never met. A whole network of areas and neurons is involved in recognizing a face. For our brain, a face is not an image, it is a code or a pattern. Therefore, if such a pattern unexpectedly appears somewhere, we can also see a face where there is none, even en masse.
These 6 regions here, each about 2, 3, 4 millimeters in diameter, consist entirely of cells that respond selectively to faces. So when a face appears, there is a strong response from these cells.
In 2 of these areas, something else happens: the recognition of familiar faces. After just a fraction of a second, the brain decides that the person looks familiar. And the more familiar a face is to us, the better and faster we can distinguish it from another.
I am the father of identical twins. They get mixed up all the time. It's easy for me to tell the difference between pictures of my daughters. For most other people, it's very, very difficult.
Okay, basically, the facial recognition machine in our heads works really well. But sometimes things are made difficult. The singer Katy Perry used to be able to pose as the slightly older actress Zooey Deschanel to get into a club. Actress Jamie Presley is constantly mistaken for her colleague Margot Robbie. And coincidence ensured that these 2 were sitting next to each other on an airplane. Unbelievable. So, how likely is it to have such a double? To find out, you would have to be able to measure similarity, quite objectively.
Faces are physical, 3-dimensional objects, and as such they can of course be measured. When we take a photo, the 3-dimensionality is reduced to 2 dimensions, and you can then measure various things in such a facial image. For example, the width of the eye is measured here, or the width of the nose is measured here. The distance from the chin to the hairline is measured here.
Wonderful. Then all you would have to do is commission a computer program to measure and compare as many photos of human faces as possible. We don't have a database with all the faces of the Earth, and perhaps that's a good thing. But that's basically how it should work. It shouldn't be that difficult.
The measurements are objective, but the interpretation, whether we now say that these 2 faces look similar, is in the eye of the beholder. This is a very significant difference between objective facial measurement and our perception of faces, which can certainly diverge.
We will come to the fact that people perceive similarity differently than computers. But let's stay with the computer results for now. What do they tell us? A doctor from the University of Adelaide in Australia carried out such a study in 2015. She had a computer measure around 4,000 faces based on 8 characteristics. These included, for example, the distance between the eyes or the length of the ears. The result? The probability of 2 faces looking exactly the same out of almost 8 billion people is 1 in a trillion. So at about 0. Does that mean there are no real doppelgangers? Well, perhaps the study had a weakness. Perhaps it was too precise. So precise, in fact, that even identical twins would have failed. Wait a minute. Identical twins? You might think that they are identical, but they are usually not. On average, they differ by 5.2 genetic changes. Their fingerprints are also different.
There is variability in identical twins. Some look extremely similar. In others, the faces are similar but not necessarily identical.
But even if twins aren't completely identical, how can a complete stranger look like us?
Our face is also unique, but we have exceptions. For example, some of them can open the iPhone of the other, so they are very close.
The human brain has to work without millimeter precision. Its determination of similarities is softer than that of the computer.
One example of this is this illusion, also known as the Clinton-Gore illusion, in which Bill Clinton and his Vice President Al Gore are shown. But if you take a closer look, you realize that the inner face of Bill Clinton has been transferred into the facial context of Gore.
The brain fell for a manipulated photo. It mistook the man with the Ken hairstyle for the vice president in this context. And that's what we often do. We mix what we see with what we expect to see. These three lines are another example of this. At first glance, they are of different lengths. But on closer inspection, we realize that they are the same length. The arrowheads pointing in different directions have deceived us. And that means that a small change can make a big difference.
Our subjective perception of faces can differ massively from the physical condition of faces. Our perception focuses firstly on the hair, then the thickness of the eyebrows, the shape of the eyes, the color of the eyes, and the thickness of the lips. When these characteristics are manipulated, we are much more susceptible to making decisions. No, this is no longer the same person.
In contrast to computers, we perceive faces holistically. In other words, we read them in their entirety as the sum of their individual elements. Just a few details have to be right and we see similarities. The same styling or makeup is often enough. The brain completes the rest. Basically, we read faces the way we read texts. Try reading this. It works, doesn't it? It says,
the brain does not perceive the individual letters exactly in the order in which they are written.
Although letters are mixed up and some are missing, we recognize words as a whole and can read the sentence. And when we read faces, it's very similar. In fractions of a second, our brain recognizes new patterns and compares them with patterns it already knows.
We can mistakenly classify faces as familiar, and this includes the fact that the face I see is similar to a memorized face. So if I know a person with a scar and see a person with a scar in a similar place, this may lead me to think, at least briefly, that this could be the person I know.
However, it doesn't always have to be such concise details that lead to confusion or the perception of similarity. These two women do not know each other, but were perceived as doppelgangers by a mutual friend. Journalist Greta from Leipzig is traveling to Paris to meet Cora and see if they really look that much alike. They haven't even seen a photo of each other. So, a real blind date.
So nice to see you.
Incredible. Like, that's me?
Yeah,
That's
is me.
you.
It reminds me of the younger version of myself. Huh?
We asked the Arte community whether this could be one and the same person. Most responded with a resounding no. Some even thought the question was completely bonkers. Quite a few thought they were mother and daughter, but only very few believed they were the same person. Some thought the image was a Photoshop manipulation, or one created by artificial intelligence. And the two themselves? Where do they see similarities? On a scale of 1 to 10?
I've never seen anyone with eyes like mine. It's the first time I've seen such a resemblance.
That's why the eyes definitely get a 10 from me.
But I have the impression our noses are only similar on one side.
It's not the most similar thing about us, I think. It gets an 6 from me.
Our mouths look quite similar.
I'll say a 7.
Your laughter is bigger than you think.
I'm sure if we had the same hairdresser, our hair would be exactly the same. 9 out of 10.
Maybe that's even why we got mixed up. 10.
The bottom line is 7.5 points of perceived similarity. And what does the computer say? We used an algorithm that compared the faces of 6,000 white women. Result?
We can measure the distance between these two faces and then say, yes, they are similar. For example, they are not on opposite sides of the center of the facial space. That is a very clear indication that they would be different. But they are also not overlapping, so they are not identical either.
Okay, Cora probably couldn't take over Greta's identity unnoticed, even though their mutual friend thought they were very similar.
I totally understand why Miriam said that at the table with the others. But I don't know if that would have happened if Cora and I happened to be sitting next to each other in the restaurant. If we would have looked over and said, "Our sister."
Yet something like this did happen to Greta. Is it perhaps because she doesn't have any particularly distinctive facial features?
Imagine you have big ears, big nose, no eyebrows. It's very difficult to produce this phenotype, we call it, this phenocopy, we call it. It's very difficult to have two like this, but it's more likely to find people that have a more in the middle average aspect.
According to this, the probability of having a doppelganger is significantly higher for some people than for others. Greta and Cora are often mistaken for other women. Do they have average faces?
In this measurement that we carried out, it turned out that they are 15 to 25% away from the center. In other words, around 20% of other faces are closer to the average than these two faces. I would have expected them to be further out there. They seemed to me to have strong characteristics that suggested a deviation from the center.
I'm surprised again and again that I get mixed up so much.
Not average faces, and yet they are often confused. Why?
My personal assumption is that it is perhaps character traits, for example, a particularly friendly nature, that lead the viewer to think, I like this person, which very quickly leads to the feeling that I might know them.
The face is undoubtedly important, but I still wouldn't overestimate the face when it comes to recognizing people. These characteristic behaviors, how someone moves, how they gesticulate, their voice. These are all moments that cannot necessarily be determined by the face. Sometimes it's the details that we remember. For example, the spaghetti hairstyle. Sometimes it's also a characteristic nose. But as we can see very clearly here, it is of course also the facial expressions that make people recognizable.
Okay, whether we recognize similarities is a very subjective thing. Cora and Greta get on really well, but from the point of view of most of the people we asked, they are not doppelgangers. But they do exist. People who look strikingly similar, like this one from a study on doppelgangers from 2022.
The lookalike are very happy to meet each other. It's something that, they say, they are not alone in the world with their faces, but they are so very happy that they are the same. Everybody wants to feel his or her individuality.
The researchers in Barcelona wanted to get to the bottom of the phenomenon of unrelated facial twins and used computers to analyze particularly similar people.
These are the same programs that are used in the airport. They use the police to detect missing people, etc. So these are more mathematical, more objective ways to classify lookalike. They recognize the shape of your eyes, of the eyebrows, of the mouth, of the lips, of the nose, the hairstyle.
16 pairs achieved matches that were similar to identical twins. A subsequent DNA analysis showed that 9 of these pairs are also genetically very similar. That was hardly surprising. After all, our appearance is primarily based on our genes. And if 2 people are very similar, their genes are very likely to be similar too. To make sure that they were not related, the family trees of the doppelgangers were also examined.
The point is that these people are not family. So they are produced in an unrelated, familiar way.
And now, take a deep breath. The astonishing result? In addition to similar faces and genes, the doppelgangers have even more in common. Weight, body size, behavior. For example, whether they smoke or not. And even in terms of educational level.
One explanation is that the gene in the face can have other functions beyond providing face shape. It's possible. But it's possible also that this gene is in harmony with another gene that relates to another behavior, to another feature.
What is it like with Greta and Cora? Do they also have similar behaviors?
I'm a journalist, which means it's my daily bread and butter to talk to all kinds of people everywhere and quickly strike up a conversation.
I consider myself to be very talkative. I like to talk and chat with everyone. I'm curious by nature.
I was born in a forest, a very small place, and that's why I grew up more with trees than with people until I was 18, more or less.
Me too, I had a tree club.
I had a snail club.
When I was small, I had my hands in the soil and I was always fascinated by nature.
I tend to live the good life. I love going out.
I am known for having soirees, especially with other women. Being together, drinking and smoking together and dancing together.
Apparently, the 2 are even more doppelgangers than suspected.
I think we resemble each other on different levels. On the one hand, a bit of face and hair and gestures and facial expressions and so on. But I was actually even more fascinated by the fact that we are obviously amazingly similar in the way we live our lives, in our fundamental values.
So let's get down to business. Could we all find someone who looks extremely similar to us? A real doppelganger?
We think that happened by pure chance. By pure chance, it means that in this case that there are so many people in the world right now that you are starting to produce people that they have an overrepresentation of common variants. You can imagine that this did not happen in the Middle Ages because there was no social media, there were no pictures around. But now we're able to identify these people because there are more people and they are more exposed. Now the recent fashion of artificial intelligence is going to provide even more lookalikes.
Okay, so maybe we should all start preparing ourselves mentally to meet our likenesses.
I think that we have unique faces, but there are people around there in the world that pretty much look like us at different degrees. Let's say if you are part of a population that you have more humans in the world, they are more likely to have a lookalike. If you have a face that is more standard, you are more likely to have a lookalike in the world.
Doesn't the concept of ultra lookalikes somehow call into question the idea of our individual uniquenesses?
What makes me unique? What makes me me? Am I me because I have exactly this measurable face? We don't want to be unique in a borderline way. And we don't want to be unique just so only I can pay with my credit card. Ultimately, we want to be unique to someone else. It's all about the fact that only you are you. And that's why, as a mother, maybe I don't want the clone child, I want mine. I want my partner, even if there are two of them. Love is about uniqueness.
Well, if that's the case, we don't have to worry about someone stealing our unique identity. And as no movie shows more vividly than the series Black Mirror, even a perfect replica could not replace a loved one.
It doesn't really work at all. The loved one is not the reproduced body standing there. It wouldn't even have the reproduced character. It's about the unique individual. It's not about having a similar person, but about having the same person.
Conclusion: there is no such thing as a 100% doppelganger. Nature has made us unique. Every face is unique, and this also applies to twins. On the other hand, people can become very similar, physically, in their character, genetically. But these are rare coincidences. Perhaps the assumption that doppelgangers are common has something to do with this, that they get a lot of public attention. That's the way it is with rare things. It is difficult to say how likely it is to have a doppelganger, but one thing is clear. Our individuality is not threatened by doppelgangers. That's the good news. The bad news is that it will probably be noticed if we send our doppelganger to that unloved family reunion.